You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. Special thanks to XDeep for their support of this podcast, which makes everything you're about to listen to possible. Now, as sidemount continues to gain further traction, whether it's for those exploring sidemount-specific diving applications such as cave diving, or for those looking for more flexible alternatives to back-mount twin-set diving, we're still faced with the issue of how to develop good sidemount diving skills and practices. The issue of finding good information and training on this is very, very real. How do you know that the instructor that you're considering knows what they're doing? I mean, after all, many agencies allow you to become a sidemount instructor very quickly and with next to no sidemount diving experience. To me, this is a very real problem, and while there are many great sidemount divers and instructors out there, globally, the standard of sidemount diving mirrors that of diving in general, and by that I mean mostly poor. So how do we fix this? How do we improve the overall standard of sidemount diving and instruction? Well, to get some more insight, I reached out to Steve Lewis. Steve is an absolute industry veteran and a passionate sidemount, CCR and cave diver. He's been at the forefront of instructor training since the early 90s, working with TDI right from its formation, and more recently becoming the director diver training for RAID. Steve is an author, a member of the Explorers Club, and as we'll learn, he led the early exploration of the Bell Island mine in Newfoundland on the east coast of Canada. In this episode, Steve and I discuss his background, his experiences as an instructor trainer. We talk about diving the mine and shipwrecks of Bell Island, and then we discuss why we love sidemount diving, and then the issues that we see with sidemount diving and instruction, and how these issues might be solved. All of this and much, much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Steve, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Well, it's my pleasure, and it's great to speak to someone who lives in one of the most beautiful countries in the world.
Thanks.
But travels a little. He's got a great rugby team. I'm not so sure about your football team or your cricket team, but hey, we'll find out in September, I guess.
We will, and we're playing England tomorrow in the cricket. In fact, tonight, overnight, and for us, we've got ourselves in a situation where I think we have to win to make the finals now.
I think the Brits do too, so it could be a good game. Who knows?
I think so. Well, thanks for the compliment too. So coming from someone living in Canada, it is a big compliment. And it's not that often I get to speak to another Steve as well. You're the first one since Steve Bogart's 30 episodes ago. That is awesome from my point of view as well.
And it's great for me at my age. It's really nice if I don't have to think too hard about who I'm speaking.
Yeah, we have a problem too. I don't know if you realize, but the name Steve is dying out. There is no one under 30 called Steve.
It's not the most popular of names now, but, it was when I was born. I think everyone of my generation is either called Steve or Stephanie.
Yes. Well, let's get on with it. So I'm really interested to hear a bit about your background in diving.
Yeah, I started diving when I was quite young, BSAC diver. I lived in the UK then. Funny story, a buddy of mine, I worked in an ad agency, and a buddy of mine had won a trip to the Red Sea. He was going to take his girlfriend, and then like a couple of weeks, well, actually a few months before the trip was planned, he and his girlfriend had this terrible argument, split up. And he came into my office. I always say to people, it was raining. It was a Monday because I was living in England. And he said, do you want to go to the Red Sea diving as my guest? Anyway, we took a BSAC class, and my first open water dives after training were in the Red Sea. Well,
that is the way to do it, right?
I kind of got spoiled.
Yes.
Going and diving in the English Channel afterwards was a little bit of a letdown. Mm-hmm. And then I had the audacity to move to Canada. Mm-hmm. And Canada has some incredible diving, but of course it's cold water, challenging, et cetera, et cetera. And then at some point I decided that it would be a really good idea to breathe nitrox. And at that time it was the forbidden gas, as you may know.
Gas, right?
Yeah. I was at an age where I was pretty sure it would do me some good. So I started teaching nitrox, and from that, before I knew it, I was a CCR cave instructor.
Hang on, there's got to be a lot of water that passed under the diver.
A couple of dives in between, but yeah,
right.
that's essentially what it is. And then a buddy of mine, a guy called Brett Gillum, who formed an agency called Technical Diving International, got a hold of me and asked me if I would be interested in becoming an instructor for them. And I took him up on his offer. And a few years after that, I actually retired and decided that I would really enjoy teaching technical diving, particularly teaching instructors, because I was old at that time, but I still had that bravado of youth where I thought I could actually change the world. And I figured training instructors would be really good. Let's make people safe and stop all this nonsense of people dying when they go for a bimble on a reef somewhere. And then obviously as one matures, one realizes it'd be great if you could change the pathway of a couple of people. So, I think I mentioned in one book, I want to save one starfish. And if I can do that, everything's good. But really more important than that, I guess, I'm a diver. I love diving. I love the same kicks as everyone else. And I often tell people that I live near the Great Lakes. I mean, if I point in that direction, that's where the Great Lakes are, and not that far, a 20-minute drive. I'm a cave diver that doesn't get seasick. So I love diving on wrecks. I love the ocean. And as we mentioned in the preamble before we went live, I've just come back from Newfoundland. I got back yesterday morning. And Newfoundland on the extreme east coast of Canada has some of the most extraordinary wrecks and some of the most extraordinary ocean diving. Cold water, I think, in the world, but it's really quite magnificent.
Yeah, I've had both Jill Heineth and Gary Dallas on raving about Bell Island, and I had the chance to have an email exchange with Rick Stanley as well, and it just sounds amazing.
It really is. You're a Kiwi. You're used to diving in water that's not 32 degrees all the time.
Exactly.
So you would kind of get on there, but it has a unique opportunity to dive on Bell Island and that area where Rick Stanley operates out of. It's that unique opportunity to dive on 4 World War II shipwrecks that were sunk by U-boats because they were loading iron ore from a mine, a very high-grade iron ore mine on Bell Island. And you can also dive in the mine. And you mentioned Jill. Jill and I worked on the last MineQuest expedition, which is in 2016. And I had the privilege of being asked to lead the first MineQuest expedition in 2007. And so that mine, I was in it the day before yesterday, and I got to tell you, it's as beautiful, as compelling, and as exciting as it ever was. You got to get there. You have to go.
I absolutely do. And you sort of talked about cold water diving, and I keep asking people about it because while we're in temperate water here in New Zealand, we're right in the middle of winter now, and it's down at about 16 Celsius. It'll probably drop another 2 degrees to 14 in August, September, but that's as cold as it gets in my neck of the woods at least.
That's not temperate.
So I've got to learn dry gloves. I've got to learn heated vests to get myself there, but just the nature of the diving, because while I'm a cave diver as well, I love shipwrecks. I have a background in the military and the Navy. So ships mean a lot to me. And seeing ships as wrecks, they have so much history, so many stories that relate to how they got where they are. I was talking to Michael Thomas in the CDG about this. Mines have the same thing. I mean, they have history and they have stories. And I find that just so interesting to research them before you go and dive and then learn more as you do the dives. So share a bit about the early expedition. I'm really interested in the 2007 period where you went in there for the first time and started to uncover what this mine had.
One of the things that was extraordinary about it is we had done a proof of concept dive the summer before. And when I say we, that was Rick Stanley, his wife Debbie, and a dive buddy of mine. And we went in there. We had absolutely no idea what we would find. Germane to this podcast, 3 of us were in Sidemount.
Awesome.
And we'll talk about why that is and why in an overhead environment, I think Sidemount is absolutely the way to go. However, we had no idea what we would find. And when we went in there, extraordinarily enough, we found incredible visibility. And I'm talking about at least 20 meters. The water temperature was brisk. It was 6 or 7 degrees. But the first thing that we found, and this was within a 10-minute swim from getting under the surface, we found the remains of a stable. And it was an eye-opener because it had so many industrial artifacts in it. On the way there were bottles, there were lunch kits, there was boots, there were tools. And it became quite obvious that this was an extraordinarily rich vein of industrial archaeology, as well as having a tremendous cultural significance in that community in Bell Island. And that was when we decided we would do the 2007 expedition. That was an absolute blast. Rick decided that we would do it in winter. So it was February. And right. Whether it's winter or summer in Newfoundland, and Newfoundland, for those that don't know, is on Canada's extreme east coast. It's probably, it's closer to Ireland than it is to the west coast of Canada, right, by a long shot. But we had some logistical challenges. A couple of us, our planes sort of got to Newfoundland and turned around and ran with their tails between their legs.
Especially in winter, right?
Oh, God, it was bloody cold.
I've had that trying to fly into Chicago, let alone Newfoundland.
Well, Chicago actually is probably worse than Newfoundland. Anyway, we got there in the end and we went in. And, of course, the mine is this 10-degree slope down. And after about 250 meters from the surface, you actually hit the water. So the temperature in the mine is constant year-round. And the water temperature is constant year-round as well. So that was fortunate. But unfortunately, as you are well aware, we had one team member, the only bloody Yank on the team. Everyone else was ex-British military or, sort of a European of some description. But he passed away. I mean, as the team leader, obviously, I carried a fair amount of guilt about that for a while. And he was a great friend, a very competent diver. And what killed him was he had an undiagnosed lung disease. He had lung cancer. His lungs exploded at a very moderate depth. He was probably doing his decompression, and that was it. So thankfully, went out like a light. That held up our further exploration of the mine for a while. But that first expedition in 2007, we laid a couple of kilometers of gold line in there. Mm-hmm. In the 2016 expedition, we cleaned a lot of that line up and laid another kilometer of line. Steve, we've not even scratched the surface. God. We may have explored less than 0.5% of what's possible. And on Sunday, a couple of days ago, a couple of guys that I was guiding, some very good friends from, one's a Sappho, one's from South Africa, and the other one's from New York. They laid new line at the fascinating depth of 11 meters. So there's a lot of stuff at very reasonable depths. Can still be seen.
Because I guess that's the fear of mines, isn't it, that they go very deep. Do you have maps of the mine that existed from the days that it operated?
Absolutely. We've added to that and we've confirmed it. And one of the things on that first expedition was we had a fellow that was very experienced in mapping caves. He sort of updated everything, and everything looked very much the way that it should have looked according to the original maps. And then in 2016, technology had changed a bit, and we had an underwater sonar, which confirmed some of our readings. And we have a pretty detailed map.
It's just amazing. And I can imagine what it's like. And as you say, the ability to find new mine passage at relatively easy depths. And then I'm sure it goes deeper as well, right?
Well, it runs at a 10-degree slope for about, I think it's 5 kilometers or 7 kilometers. That's all academic. At the far end of it, you're about 1,600 meters deep.
Maybe not in our lifetime.
No, I mean, this you couldn't even get a newt suit in there. One of the things that we discovered pretty quickly was that Sidemount was the way to go in that mine, because there's a lot of stuff hanging from the ceiling. It's not been cleaned up. It's not been sanitized. So everything in there is what was originally in there. And, of course, telephone lines and communication stuff and lighting and everything is still above your head. So a funny story on the 2016 expedition, the first day, there was a diver there from Europe, a lovely woman, and I was chosen to escort her on the first day because she was taking photographs. And I was in Sidemount, and she was in Backmount. And I think in the half an hour that it took us to get to a point of great interest, I untangled her from the overhead at least 4 times.
Yes.
So
I talk a lot about the benefits of Sidemount, and that's something that sometimes kind of slips under the radar a bit, is this entanglement and streamlining aspect. And I'll give you an example. I was cave diving a couple of weeks ago in Mount Gambier, and we went into a zero visibility entry into the cave and directly vertical down through not a tight restriction, but through a restricted passage. I got entangled twice on the way through in Sidemount. Now, it took me 5 seconds or less each time to unentangle myself. Once was on my cylinder valve, and the second time was on my fin. But it was just super easy because there was nothing behind me and nothing out of the way that I couldn't find and remove immediately. So this aspect of entanglement and having things where you can access them is really important, isn't it?
I think it is. And one of the great differences between a cave and a mine and a shipwreck is that the last two are not clean. I mean, obviously in a cave, if there's decoration, you don't want to go up to the ceiling and crack down or knock off 25, 30,000 years of
Absolutely.
history. But in a wreck or in a mine, you have a lot of stuff overhead. And really, the only way to get through it with any sense of being comfortable or safety is to have nothing on your back. And
Sure.
you know, as far as we're concerned, obviously that's Sidemount. Someone asked me a few years ago why I was diving Sidemount on the wrecks in the Great Lakes. Well, we were penetrating them. A guy who was with a sort of a mindset that everything had to be back-mounted doubles. And I said to him, well, the reason's very simple. Everything that actually means anything, my life support system, I can look at.
Yes.
To a Sidemount diver, everyone that's listening to this, that's an experienced Sidemount diver, goes, duh. Yeah, of course. But it really is. I mean, it's so essential, especially in those two environments, that you have nothing on your back.
Yeah.
Especially a manifold. Well, it's not a funny story. It's a sad story. You should actually weep for me at this point. On Sunday, on the second dive, I borrowed one of the guy's back-mounted doubles. I can't remember the last time I was in a set of back-mounted doubles. I was a bloody disaster. And within 3 minutes of being in the mine, I said to myself quietly, actually maybe less than quietly, maybe I screamed at the top of my lungs, this sucks. There was an expletive in there as well.
Yes, yeah.
Because it really did. And I don't know when the last time you dove a set of back-mounted doubles, back-mounted steel tanks was, but try it tomorrow and then go like 10 degrees off of horizontal or, off of perpendicular.
Yes.
And you will find that there's a tremendous amount of inertia pulling you over on your side.
You've got a turning moment, right?
How did we ever do that? It's crazy.
It's interesting. And I think, in defense of the back-mount divers, they just know what they know. They're comfortable and they've done all their training in that and they've got themselves set up, then that's the way they like to dive. And when back-mount divers criticize Sidemount for being used in open water, that's my argument against it is, hey, listen, I've got hundreds and hundreds of Sidemount dives now. I'm extremely competent at it and I feel comfortable in it and I can take it anywhere, just as you would take back-mount doubles into a cave, even though I would argue it's not the best configuration there. I will take Sidemount into open water. And the only time I take pause is when I have to go past 4 cylinders or I'm diving off a boat and the sea conditions are starting to fight me.
There are tools to do a job, and sometimes back-mount is the right tool to do the job.
Yes.
In the environments that I was talking about, I don't think they are. But you can get by. I mean, I own, as I said to you earlier, I live in a converted schoolhouse, and I'm still doing the conversion. I think I own 6 different hammers. Now, at least 4 of those have different tasks. And I'll actually, if I've got something to do and I've got the wrong hammer, I'll go and find the right one.
Yeah.
Right tools for the job.
Sure.
It's just that as a default, I think Sidemount has more flexibility than most. You're right. Identifying it as a bit of a drag when it comes to being on a boat. You got 3-meter seas and, the dive master is throwing up in the corner. Maybe back-mount is the quickest way to get in the water. But if you're really sensible about it, you dress and you equip yourself for what's at depth. And if you're going on a wreck and you're going to go do a swim through even, it's, I think, much safer to be in Sidemount.
Yeah. Earlier off mic, we talked a little bit about Sidemount diving. We're on that subject now. And we both lamented about the standard of side mount training that exists around the world. And I've covered this many, many times on this podcast, but never with you. So this is, I think, a great opportunity for me and everyone listening to hear your thoughts on side mount training, the standard of training in general, and then what we can do to improve side mount diving from a training perspective.
Well, I mean, I have a new role, Director of Diver Training for RAID, and I'm very honored to be given that opportunity to try to make a difference and to rewrite some standards. And I think I mentioned before, one of the great opportunities that I have had is being able to perhaps influence some instructors, because if you want to make a difference, you influence instructors and instructor trainers. And I think what's happened is that you and I are both aware you've been diving side mount for as long as I have, and we have seen a tremendous, everyone embraces side mount now as being mainstream. But we both remember it when it was, if you were a side mount, you were a quirky bastard.
Sure.
All same stuff.
Get off my boat. Sort of thing.
You're going to do what?
Why would you do that?
And you're diving nitrox. My God, man. But I think, there's always the attraction of the almighty dollar or pound or whatever it is. And it's very easy to throw stones at people, but it's very difficult to do it in a way that's going to change their behavior. And that's the challenge, because I think what we have is a lot of people who want to teach side mount, who want to turn people on to this wonderful way of diving, but who don't have a bloody clue what's involved in setting the gear up. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you see agencies that shall remain nameless that post photographs of side mount divers, and I put that in very strong inverted commas, who have bottles sticking up all over the place and stuff hanging down, and they look like a damn Christmas tree. In fact, they look like a Christmas tree that's been decorated by someone who's, one, dyslexic, and two, is stoned out of their brain. I mean, they just look horrible. And the beauty of side mount is that it has the potential to be the most streamlined, the safest kit configuration for open circuit scuba. And what's happening is that safety, or that is being compromised. I was on a boat a couple of years ago, and someone said, one of the wonderful things about side mount is that it's so flexible. You can basically do whatever you want. And I looked at them, and I think I ripped them a new asshole. I'm not sure. Well, I think most of us agree that side mount, it certainly is flexible in terms of its application, but in terms of actually configuring the kit, it's no more or no less flexible than back mount. Mm-hmm. There are things that you have to do to make sure that it works. You and I have probably both been at dive sites where you see a side mount diver and they've got hoses that are too long and clips that are in the wrong place, and the ass of their aluminum 80 is sticking up like a flag on Canada Day. And of course, the question is, what do we do to improve that? I mean, I've got no interest in being the scuba police. I have absolutely zero interest. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, you can do whatever the hell you want, but please do not call yourself a member of my gang, because you're not. So I think what we have to do is, one, write standards that are realistic and that take into account the very, very different environmental conditions. For instance, we mentioned Bell Island. Here we have 2-degree water, and a heated vest goes a long way, but you really do need a dry suit and thick thermal protection. My kit there, when I'm diving open circuit, is extraordinarily different to the kit that I use when I'm diving a cave in Mexico.
Right.
Different cylinders, different way of setting them up. Clips are in different places, clips are different sizes, bungees are different lengths, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very, very difficult to get quality instructors when they don't know what they're doing.
Let me dig into that for a second, because I think that's a really interesting aspect, because when we look at what it takes to be a side mount instructor with certain agencies, and there's not just one of them either, by the way, all you need to do is be an open water scuba instructor and do the specialty training. And you can be a side mount instructor in a few days, a few hours in some cases.
Well, you do a user's course one weekend, and the next and you're teaching it because you're a muckety muck for that agency. Almost gave the game away there, but
like in defense of the agency that will remain nameless, I don't think they're the only one. I kind of feel that we're starting to delve into what the problem is, which is the standard of instructor training for side mount instructors. So this is the question now. What do we do about that? What do you think the level should be, or the prerequisites should be, to be a side mount instructor?
And that's a terrific question. That's something that we're actually at RAID, we're actually throwing backwards and forwards right now. And we haven't decided, or we haven't come up with a solution that's workable, because you do have to allow a little bit of slop in there.
Yes.
And it's that degree of slop that we're really refining or defining right now. I would like to see, I feel the same about any technical instruction.
Yes.
To do any technical instruction whatsoever, you should be a full cave diver with 100 cave dives. But that's not a necessarily popular position to be in.
Well, let's not forget, agencies make money from instructor training too, don't they?
They do. Agencies also spend a lot of money on lawyers.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be great if we could spend less money on lawyers and more money on... It's really time. I don't know whether... It's certainly not a generational thing. A friend of mine said, this generation, they want everything so quickly. Bullshit. My generation wanted stuff immediately, so it's not generational.
It's changed, right?
Yeah. It's really one of those things that we could do a better job of telling the average punter exactly how much time and effort is going to be involved in getting to a certain level. Hey,
Yes.
If you are strapped, 11-liter cylinder, 80 cubic foot cylinder on your back, and put a stab jacket on and jump in and do a bimble on a reef at 10 meters. Great. Fantastic. I don't think we do a very good job of explaining the difference between that and what you and I do in terms of our recreational diving. And evidence of that is the fact that we still have open water divers going into caves and losing it because they think it's okay.
Yeah, well, I went through that with Ed Sorensen just a few episodes back, and his very unfortunate recovery in the Dominican Republic. And I spoke to Philip Lehman about that as well. He's a very, very passionate guy about that. And so I don't know if I need to go there again, but I hear you. And back to the instructor level thing, I kind of used my own example a while ago, but I'm not very typical in that I came to dive instruction quite late. I'd been diving for 30 years before I became an instructor, so that's not very normal. But I had done 150, 200 side mount dives before I became an instructor. Now, I don't know that that's necessary. In fact, it's not necessary. But what it did mean is that I was an experienced side mount diver before, and I'd had lots of different conditions, lots of different environments, caves, shipwrecks, open water, steel cylinders, aluminum cylinders. So I'd done a lot of that before I became an instructor. But I'm trying to sort of think of a RAID picture. Gary Dallas is a phenomenal side mount diver and instructor. If you go and train with Gary or someone of that level or someone who can teach what he teaches, and then you come out of that course as a side mount diver and you put X number of side mount dives on top of that training that you've received from him or the likes of him, then I think you're going to be competent. And then you say, I'm either was an instructor or I become an instructor and I do another course, which is the side mount instructor course. I kind of feel that person would be a good side mount instructor, as opposed to what we covered earlier.
Potentially, yeah. Like Gary's a good example because, Gary's he's a very creative guy.
Yes.
An ex-nutcase motorcycle rider who really knows how to tie a knot.
Yes.
And you would hope that every side mount instructor would be as dedicated as Gary is. Gary lives, breathes, eats, side mount.
Mm-hmm.
You can't expect that of everyone, but it would be really nice if you could mandate that as an agency and say, okay, Gary, everyone's got to be a Gary Dallas. I spent a lot of time in Mexico, and one of the things that strikes me about Mexico is there are so many side mount divers who should be instructing, and they're not instructors.
Yeah.
I'd like to walk around and do the papal blessing. And say,
you're right. I kind of get that. That was my 30 years. That was my 30 years of diving. I just wanted to dive. And the desire to become an instructor came later, So I kind of get that. And yeah, there are some great divers.
What made you want to be an instructor?
It was sort of a life change. I was the president of a software company. So I had the money and resources to dive in my spare time, and I enjoyed doing that. And I think as I went further and further into Sidemount and cave diving in particular, and then I sort of had a nexus in my career, if you like, or I decided that I would finish running software companies. I didn't want to do it anymore. And so at that point, I thought, I'm going to go diving. And then I thought, well, let's go and do some training. And so I went over to Malta and trained with Tom Steiner and Audrey Cadell and some of the people there, amazing divers and amazing instructors. And I saw what it could be to be a great instructor. Prior to that, my role models in instructing were good, but not at that, what I would call world-class level. So I saw what it could be, and I thought, yeah, that would be something that I'd like to do. So it came from that.
Can you explain that phrase, I saw what it could be?
Yeah, I had seen good divers before. What struck me by Tom, Audrey, and the people that went through Gozo Technical was just how stable they were in the water and how precise and I'd seen it with Steve Bogart's videos and Steve Martin and some of those guys as well, but just seeing these people in the water and starting to understand what it was to be not just a good diver, but a great diver. And it just became aspirational for me. I thought, yeah, I want to be like that. And being like that was also to be an instructor who could pass that on to other people. Because the pleasure I got from that, I didn't realize how nice it would feel. When you're stable, when you're relaxed, when you're, almost at one with the water, and Sidemount facilitates that. That's a great feeling, in any environment.
So you've just answered your question in terms of standards. What is it that we look for as in an agency at the upper management level of an agency? What is it that we look for when we say, okay, we set a standard here for our instructor trainers?
Yes.
Okay, that's it. I mean, that's exactly it. It's stability in the water. It's all that other stuff. A long time ago, a guy called Brett Gillum said to me, the only thing that you have to look out for when you're training an instructor is empathy.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, this coming from a stoner who's got a joint in his hand when he's telling is interesting, but God damn it, he's right. So as an agency, what do you do to try to improve the quality and standardize the training in a course such as Sidemount, which when you think about it is an esoteric course to begin with? Okay, so, what do we do? Well, you can set a standard and say, we have to make it so that they can do these skills without varying in the water column 20 centimeters.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. It's necessary. But all that pales when you come to the philosophical stuff is if you're an instructor and you can somehow convince that student that it's really fun to work at this to the point that you can look a fish in the eye, go backwards, forwards, look the same fish in the eye, and then when it swims off, you can follow it exactly. Because that's where I believe that every scuba diver that's worth her salt or his salt really wants to be a bird.
Yes.
Really wants to be able to fly. And getting back on Sidemount makes sense to me because you've got wings. Those cylinders on your side are like wings. And you said after 4 cylinders, it gets a little bit iffy. To me, I think it's 6, but it's the same thing. It's a tool to do a job, and the job that you're doing is something secondary, which is penetrate a wreck, go in a cave, go through a cave that's highly decorated, that's got very small passages. But the primary objective, apart from staying alive, the primary objective is I want to fly, goddammit, because I am not a bird. I am restricted. Gravity pins me to this goddamn planet. But once I'm in the water, in Sidemount, I can fly. If we can have a cadre of instructor trainers who feel similarly to the way you feel, we'd win. Yeah. Instead of I've got Saturday and Sunday with you on this island to certify you as a yuckity-yuck-yuck Sidemount diver, we might make a difference.
Yeah.
We might improve the quality.
Oh, I think so. The days of the 2-day course need to disappear completely, don't they? I mean, as you say, you can't learn this in a weekend. It's much more fiddly than that, and there's a lot more to learn.
Steve, it's been a long time since I taught an open water course. What's funny about that is every instructor course I've ever run, I've said to the instructors at the end of it, you know what? What you should really do is every year make a point of teaching an open water punter. A punter off the street, teach them to dive because it will really improve your skills and you'll get a tremendous kick out of it. Well, I haven't taught an open water course since the last century.
Right.
And last year, I taught my girlfriend to dive. And open water program, a raid open water program in Sidemount, which she loved. It took me 10 days. I couldn't do it any less than 10 days because I'm a terrible instructor or because she was
No. You know what it is? I suffer from the same thing now. And I have some poor students working with me now who've been working with me for months. And one thing I'll never do is compromise standards. And they're great guys, but it's just taking time for them to learn what they need to learn. And the bottom line is sometimes it takes time. And I think at a certain level, you start to think, hey, listen, this is what it takes to be a good diver. I'm not really ready to finish this until you meet this standard that I'm happy with. And that would take 10 days, I'm sure. I'm sure she's a good diver now, though, right?
Well, it's funny because the last time we were in Mexico together, we were in a cenote in the open water area, and she was bimbling around. And there was a very good friend of mine was taking some clients for a cenote dive.
Yes.
And she saw him and kind of waved at him, and he waved back. And I could see her expression, you know, like body language. She saw the punters that she was taking into the cave, and she looked at them and looked at me. And when we got out of the water, she said, were those people divers? And I said, yeah. She said, well, why aren't they horizontal? Why are they flapping around? Why are their arms moving around? And I thought to myself, I've got an I love me wall, and you can see it behind me, but like, I try to sort of keep it in perspective. I don't like to pat myself on the back, but I thought, holy crap, that's really cool. We've got a scuba Nancy who's an open water diver.
Yeah. And this is what happens when you train family too. I've never taken my son through a course, but he's done maybe 100 plus dives with me. And he did his training in Fiji, and so it was okay. No, it wasn't. He passed the course. And then he started diving with me. And this is as a teenager too. He used to get some pretty severe talking to at the end of dives about what he should and shouldn't be doing, and sometimes underwater as well. But this young guy, about 30 dives, he started to really get it, and he was trimmed. And I wasn't instructing him. It was just he was diving with me, and he was observant enough to pick up what was going on. And within about 30 dives, he was in trim. Within about another 30 dives, he was starting to really pay attention. And a couple of times he helped me out on a dive. He became such a good buddy. And then he came in one day and did an intro to side mount dive with me, which was we jumped into a pool, put some side mount cylinders on him. Here's what side mount feels like. You get to set some equipment up, get in the water, and do one dive in a pool. Anyhow, he gets in the pool. He's instantly trimmed out. And then I've never taught him a frog kick. He starts frog kicking. And it was almost perfect. And I got video and pictures of this kid, first time in side mount ever, completely trimmed out, frog kicking across the pool, stable, doing regulator switches. And I thought, wow, that's pretty awesome. And that's learning by observation. That I think is awesome. And having good role models, again, somebody that you know who is a good diver facilitates that, whether they're being instructed or whether they're just observing.
Yeah, I imagine you were lucky as I was, and when you first started diving, you had good people that you dove with, and you learn a lot by osmosis. And that's another thing about what do we look for in instructors and instruction. First of all, let's charge a realistic price for courses. I mean, my girlfriend, I charged her $3,000. She didn't pay me yet.
Perhaps payment in kind, I don't know.
But I think that learning by osmosis, we have to get them comfortable enough to actually pay attention to what's going on. That whole situational awareness thing where we say to them, I'm going to certify you, but you really need to know that this card just means you've got a license to learn. That would be kind of good as well. It's we all say it, we give that lip service, but it really is true. And teaching family is difficult because I think that if we're conscientious about it, we give them a harder time than we
totally.
would do a client. And that's okay. I taught my son to cave dive. And
Yes.
it's really lovely when you look at someone and go, oh, wow, he looks pretty good. Yeah, that's neat.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Ed Sorensen. Ed's a good friend of mine, and I've spent a lot of time with Ed. And we have barbecued a lot of briskets together. But his logo, the logo of Cave Adventurers, is actually a photograph of someone who used to work for Ed on his open water diver program.
Wow.
That photograph of that diver in perfect cave trim with 2 cylinders at their side, exactly parallel to their body's lateral line, is an open water diver on their initial open water dives.
Brilliant, isn't it?
And I think when we look at that, that's a bit of a potential eye-opener and a kick in our collective, as instructors, a kick in our collective ass, because it can be done.
Yes.
Can be done. And if we really want to be serious about and non-disingenuous about our standards and how great it is to teach people how to dive and fly, we need to pay some attention to that and not let people, if it takes 10 days, it takes 10 days.
Yeah.
And if you're only earning $1,000, for doing it, well, that's your.
Yeah, that's right. And this is one of the bigger problems with the industry too, is the amount of money that people are prepared to invest in something where they're taking themselves into an environment that can potentially kill them. And yet they're fighting over $300, $400 open water courses. It really just doesn't work, does it?
I totally agree with you. I used to be involved in advertising and marketing, and, the truism is that something's worth is directly related to what it cost.
Yes.
In the consumer's mind. And over the years, I think we've both seen the value of an open water course diminished because people are sort of saying, well, you can learn to dive, mate. It would cost you like $200. That includes your mask, your fins, your snorkel.
Yeah.
And that's bloody ridiculous, because I don't know if you drink wine.
I do.
You drink wine? I've got a story about New Zealand wine, but I won't go there. But a decent bottle of wine, what is a decent bottle of wine? If you were to buy me a Christmas present of a bottle of wine, how much would you spend?
Steve, I'm already thinking that you're going to become a good friend. I'm going to spend at least $50.
Okay, so $50 for a bottle of wine. So you would think, how quickly could you and I drink that bottle of wine? Do the math. So here we are. We come to a decision that
it's gone in half an hour at least.
Oh,
maybe less.
Because we're going to chug it. The corollary to that is, how much money is your time worth? A day of your time, your experience. There's a great story about the Zen potter who's being interviewed by the guy from, I think it was Life magazine or New York Times, and he's throwing pots as this guy interviews it. And he's a master potter. He's like 85 years old. And he throws a pot and he takes it off the wheel and he puts it in. And the guy looks at him and says, wow, that's really, how much do those pots cost? And he said, well, it depends, but I think this gallery is selling them for about $100 each. And the guy said, well, Christ, it only took you like 30 seconds to throw that pot. And he stops the wheel, puts the clay down, wipes his hand, looks at the interviewer or the journalist and says, no, my son, it took me 85 years and 30 to throw that pot. We sell ourselves so short, because if we're really truly gifted or think we're gifted at teaching someone how to dive, we have to take into account all of the time that we've spent and all the money we've spent, all the mistakes we've made. How much gear have you got in your garage that is totally useless?
Yeah, a lot. In fact, I've got 2 suitcases full of it.
There you go. All that's your investment. You should take that into account, or we should take that into account. Some of us have got more than a couple of suitcases full. And we don't. We sort of say, oh, it's going to cost you $20, when really it should be costing $200 or $2,000.
Yeah, I hear you. And the other thing too is this training for certification versus training to learn to be a diver. I mean, one thing I make really clear is that you're paying me for training. I'll train you to the best of my ability and I'll move you as far forward as I can in the time that we've got. However, that may or may not result in certification. And in many cases, actually too many cases, it doesn't because of the time that is available to us.
Yeah.
So it really is important that people ask themselves when they're going for dive training, what is my goal? And your goal should be to become a better diver.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I mean, diving's strange because it's a different world, but it's like golf or, well, let's say it's like golf or skiing. If you take the average golfer or the average skier, what is their primary goal? To get better.
Yeah.
To get better. To be able to sort of go down the slope and justify the fact that they're wearing a bright pink ski suit.
Which only looks good on the ski field and the disco, right?
The fact that I have a 54-inch waist doesn't matter. So I think one of the things that we, again, from an agency point of view, maybe we can start to educate people in the fact that the primary goal of training, it's not to stay alive. I mean, secretly it is that, but it's to be better, to look better, to enjoy more instead of just the basic sort of thing. That's why I love my I Love Me walk, because it means, it's an attempt to improve.
Yes. So on that vein of improvement, so for the people who are listening...
No, they've all stopped listening by now.
For the people who would like to improve as Sidemount divers, what advice would you give them?
I think go slowly. Get your ass to somewhere where there's a lot of Sidemount diving going on. I mean, here in the Americas, that, to me anyway, that's certainly Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula. I have seen thousands of Sidemount divers there. And I would say the majority of them are very skilled at what they do and take it very seriously, self-improvement very seriously. North Florida, that has certainly a lot of cave divers, not so much so, but certainly Ed Sorensen in Mariana is someone. Go and see these people and regard, you don't have to go there and take a class. Ask them to guide you on a dive.
Yeah.
And watch them. Steal their secrets. Ask them, why are you using that particular bolt snap? Why is your bungee that long? Why do you use that particular side mount harness? I mean, a good side mount diver can make any harness work, but given their druthers, which one would they use? And you're going to get probably 5 answers from 5 divers. Be inquisitive. Question when someone says something. That would be basic advice to someone who wants to become a better side mount diver.
Yeah. Well, that very term was the term that I used for my time in Gozo, because while I took training there, I got to dive day after day, week after week, month after month with amazing divers. And I just watched them like a hawk. And it was exactly that. I was stealing their moves. Actually, one of the interesting things for me, it's even things as simple, and I say simple, as a back kick. Because I see so many people in my mind doing it wrong. And I think, why, for heaven's sake, you've got a pair of fins on, why are you trying to use the side of the fin to do a back kick when the top of the fin is the ideal way to do that? And all you really have to do is learn how to turn your ankle a little bit, and you can use the top of the fin, the whole fin blade. So these little things that I picked up where I was doing a rudimentary back kick using the side of my fins because I'd either been taught or I'd seen others or I'd heard others saying that was the way to do it. And then seeing Audrey Cadell and Tom Steiner do it, and I thought, oh, whoa, hang on, they're almost as fast backwards as I am forwards. How can they do that? And hang on, they're a lot more efficient. They're using the whole fin blade. Just simple things like that, learning stability, learning how they moved, how they held themselves, what order they did things in. I have a martial arts background as well, and that's what we used to do in that. You wouldn't get all of the instruction given to you verbally. You were shown. And so by being shown, you then had to go, now, how did they do that? How did that happen? So it's important. Observation.
Observation, yeah. I mean, I think that's it. And a knowledge, I mean, you mentioned a martial arts background. I think that someone came to me and said, I want to become a good cave diver. It may sound a bit weird, but one of the first things I would say to them is learn to breathe.
Yes.
Take martial arts, take Tai Chi, take Kwon Do, take Qigong. And learn to breathe.
Yes.
Take yoga, learn to breathe. Do a Wim Hof class, learn to breathe.
Yeah. And being able to control that breathing under pressure too, isn't it? So I had a conversation with a friend who'd had an incident in a cave, and he talked about how he had to bail out and how high his sac rate went when he went on to open circuit under a stressful situation. And I thought, yeah, that's right. That is exactly what happens, of course. However, given that situation, what do you do? And you just have to calm your mind. And then by calming your mind, the objective is control by breathing. And it's amazing how they work together. The more controlled your breathing is, the more under control CO2 is, the more calm your mind can become.
Yeah. I don't want to come across as too kind of hippie and, let's all go to Woodstock and smoke up and stuff. Listen to music. But
there's a but coming. Yeah.
I meditate every day. And
yes.
I try to get at least an hour in every day. And it's a huge advantage because, look, we live in a world where excuse me, shit hits the fan. Is that an expression I can use?
Of course.
The shit hits the fan every day. And we can respond to that in many, many different ways. I always say to people, if a piece of equipment breaks underwater, the best response is to imagine the owner of your local dive shop with the Visa or the credit card machine in their hand. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's going to cost you money. Big deal. It shouldn't cost you your life. But if something goes wrong, think of it as a bloody inconvenience and it's going to cost you money, and then get on with it. Instead of something goes wrong and you go, oh, God, something's gone wrong. I'm gonna die. And you're not going to die. It's going to cost you money.
Yeah, exactly.
You start breathing like a freight train and, like being sick.
Well, if you lose control of the situation, right? Actually, Ed described this almost exactly the same as you do. It's kind of, oh, that sucks. Now what am I going to do about it? Yeah. And Jill Heineth had the same thing. She talked about steps to success or steps to survival, which is really about saying, hey, I have a problem. What am I going to do first? What am I going to do second? And clearing your mind so that you can think that all through, I think, is the important factor.
I mean, I don't want to give away too much, but the book I'm working on right now is about primacy. It's about breathing.
Yes.
So if you think about that, and the reason I'm doing it is if you can control your breathing, you're not going to panic. You're going to think clearly, et cetera, et cetera. And I've always had this expression, like, I can teach you the calculus. I can teach you differential calculus. I don't care what level of math or arithmetic or whatever you've got. I don't even care if you can't add 2 plus 3 plus 4. I don't care if you don't know what a prime number is. I can teach you calculus, and I can do it underwater as long as we've got enough to breathe.
Yes.
If we've got air to breathe, you can solve any problem.
Yeah.
Your arm could be chewed off, and if you can get a tourniquet on it and you've got something to breathe, you can solve it. But we don't, as an industry, teach our beginning divers the importance of breath control. Yeah. We say, don't hold your breath, and we say, oh, look at your SPG. Well, some agencies do. but we don't actually give them any martial arts background. What's one of the first things that you learn?
To breathe. Mm-hmm.
And we don't do that. And it's just as important in scuba as it is in martial arts.
It comes back to, again, looking at one of the benefits of Sidemount. We practice out of gas scenarios so much, and we discuss it ad infinitum about what our setup should be for a long hose versus 2 short hoses versus whatever. However, in Sidemount, the chance of having a complete out of gas scenario immediately is extremely remote. You get more chance of being, as I say, run over by a yellow bus on a Thursday, driven by the Cookie Monster, than you have of having a complete out of gas.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Sidemount configuration, you have much more control over your gas than you do in any other configuration because there are so many options in Sidemount that just do not exist in any other, or especially in back mount. Yeah. And I've had discussions with people who say, oh, that's not necessarily true. But when you really boil down the essential elements of Sidemount and its advantages, it's abundantly true. I mean, God, to begin with, did you dive back mount at some time in your career?
You know what? I didn't. I've dived single cylinder back mount, but never twin set for any period of time.
The classic is to sort of say to someone who's a back mount aficionado, how often do you do stretching exercises? You have to make sure your dry suit doesn't constrict you or your dry suit underwear. You know what we do in Sidemount? We just reach down and twiddle their hand. I could do a full shutdown drill,
Yes.
Turn one off, switch regulators, flash your light, turn it on, check the SPD, do the other in 35 seconds.
Yes.
To do that in a pair of back-mounted doubles, I don't think many people could do it in 35 seconds.
No, agreed. And I remember talking to John Chatterton about this when I did my advanced rec training with him, and they used to put weights on their hands and put their hand over the back of their shoulder to improve their shoulder and tricep flexibility so they could reach their valves, So to go to those extreme measures to be able to reach a valve, and then, as you say, put yourself in cold water like 2 to 4 degrees or something in the undergarments that go with that, and expect yourself to do it. Plus, the issue of just diagnosing the fault. Which valve is it? Which regulator is it?
Yeah. What's the best option for me to adopt right now when I've got something going? Is it a low pressure hose? Is it a high pressure hose? I don't know until, where's my buddy? Can my buddy look at it and explain to me what's going on? There's all these things. Whereas in Sidemount, look down and say, there you go. Oh, well, drag, I better shut that down. And then I can feather it if I need to get to that gas. I can turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. And that's pretty easy. At the end of my career teaching back-mount divers shutdown skills, I used to make them feather their right side. Convince them that it wasn't everything they thought it was.
Indeed. So, listen, Steve, we've gone for just over an hour, and I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. We could go on longer, I'm sure. I've really appreciated your time. I think we've learned a lot. So you said you have a new book coming. When should we expect that?
I think we can expect that around Christmas.
Out with the Christmas movie. So there's a gift for all the divers out there. And do you have a title for it yet?
Well, the working title is, I hope I can swear, Breathe, Motherfucker.
No, of course you can. I like it.
But I think that working title will change.
And it'll be available through Amazon, I assume, or somewhere like that?
Amazon, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we'll look out for that. There's a Christmas gift for anyone you know who's a diver.
Steve, it's been a blast. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the invitation to speak. And, hey, keep up this blog, man, because it's very, very interesting. I'm not sure what your readership or listenership is, but I'm sure it will grow. And it's a great concept. I really like it. I enjoy it.
Thank you. That means a lot to me because this whole podcast was about me scratching my own itch, which was I needed an outlet for myself creatively, but also I just felt there was a real lack of good knowledge and a good voice around sidemount diving, and the forums are full of so much rubbish, and there's some good stuff in there, but it's hard to find. What I also found was the best divers don't participate. So it was really a mechanism to get voices such as yours out there, and for those who are listening to be able to take advantage of that knowledge. There's an entertainment aspect there too, and I think listening to conversations between a couple of divers, I've long maintained the divers love diving, but the thing they like next best is having a beer after diving and talking shit about diving. So I think this facilitates that for me, and I hope for many others. Again, thank you. I hope we get a chance to meet sometime. Bell Island, I keep saying it's on my list, so I need to come and do that.
If you want to come to Bell Island, let me know, because having just introduced a couple of good friends to that environment, I would love to host you there. It's a very, very special place. Well,
it'll be a good test for me too. I'm Sidewinder training with Ed Sorensen in September, and one thing with the Sidewinder, I don't think it likes cold water as much as some other rebreathers, but I hear there's ways around that, so I'll have to come and see if that works out for me.
All right. Well, the Sidewinder is a very fine side mount rebreather, and give Ed a big hug and a kiss from me.
He doesn't look like the sort of kissing guy, is he?
He's a pussycat, man.
I feel like I'm being set up.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Steve. A pleasure.
You bet. All the best.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. It was fantastic to meet Steve and learn more about his thoughts on how we can improve side mount diving and instruction. And I think we really started to delve into some very, very interesting aspects around the standards that can be applied to side mount instructors. And I'd really like to take that further later on. If you have any feedback on that, I'd love to hear it, so just drop me a note through our Facebook page. Just one note about learning more about Sidemount diving. If you're not able to get to a really good instructor or you want some more information, remember my Sidemount Fundamentals ebook is available via my website, Sidemount Pros. So that's www.sidemountpros.com, and it's there under the store. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.